Dana nearly took my head off when she heard, an inside source was an inside risk, and then, being Dana, she spent an hour turning risk into procedure. Chloe would touch nothing, remove nothing, alter nothing. Photographs only, of documents in plain view when the drawer stood open, her own phone, timestamps on. And over the next week and a half, my daughter, who cried in a parking lot on Thursday and served pot roast on Sunday, photographed the inside of her husband's office. The margin call statements, red flagged and final. The Lund Bridge ledger. A draft listing agreement for a West Shore property, signed by Gary Sobel. And an unsigned letter of intent to a buyer from downstate. Offering my husband's house for a price that would exactly, almost to the dollar, plug the hole in Derek's client accounts. Motive, in his own font, she almost didn't make it. Day 8, she told me later, he came home early and quiet, the dangerous quiet, while the drawer stood open and her phone was in her hand. She heard the garage door and had time for exactly one motion, drawer closed with a hip, phone into the laundry basket she'd staged beside the desk, a wife tidying. He stood in the office doorway for a moment. Asked what she was doing in his office. Looking for the checkbook, she said, bored, annoyed, holding his socks. And Derek, who could read a room like I read a ledger. But who had never once in his life considered that his tired wife might be a room worth reading, grunted and went to shower. 11 days, and my daughter aged a year for each of them. Priya, when Dana asked her formally, said yes before the sentence finished. She would testify to the mismatched schedule, to her own contemporaneous notes, to the gap between the woman described at her hiring and the woman she drove to the market. I have worked in 11 houses, she said, in that level voice. I know what decline looks like. I will say what I saw. The witness list settled like a hand of cards finally arranged, Priya and her notebook. Ray and the certified records. The pharmacy's custodian with 14 months of refill history. Whitcomb and his 11 pages. My Traverse City physician. And Chloe, whose name Derek had drawn onto his own petition, ready to stand up under oath and take it back. A case is a house you build in the dark, and you only get to turn the lights on once. For 11 days I walked through that dark house checking every joist. And on the last night, the night before the hearing, snow coming down over the lake in big theatrical flakes, headlights swung into my driveway at 8 o'clock, and Derek came up my walk alone. He looked tired. I want that on the record, whatever it's a record of. Under the porch light, for the first time all year, the golf catalog polish had thumbprints on it. He sat down at my kitchen table without being asked, folded his hands like a deacon, and spoke in a brand new voice, soft, rueful, man-to-man, the voice for closing, Evelyn. Tomorrow's going to be awful. Lawyers, doctors, strangers picking you apart in a public room, I never wanted that. None of us want that. He let the silence do some work, then slid a single page across the table. Not the folio this time. One page. There's another way. You signed the West Shore property over to the family trust, voluntarily, tonight, your own free choice, no court in the world can question it, and tomorrow morning I withdraw the petition. All of it goes away. No hearing. No doctors. You stay in your house as long as you want, I'll put it in writing. We go back to Sunday dinners. He looked at me with what I genuinely believe he thought was kindness. Let me protect you from tomorrow, and there it was, the whole man, in one offer. He suspected nothing, the deal itself proved it, because you don't bribe a woman you think is dangerous, you bribe a woman you think is beaten. But he feared something. Tomorrow. Oaths. A record. Rooms he couldn't manage. He was standing at the edge of his own hearing offering to trade it away for one signature, which told me, better than any exhibit in my file, exactly what he thought that courtroom might cost him. I looked at the page. I looked at the pen. I let the fog come into my eyes one last time, and I patted his folded hands with my papery, doddering, patient ones. You're sweet to worry, I told him. But Chloe reads me everything first. Doctor's orders. I smiled the milkiest smile in my repertoire. "We'll sort it all out tomorrow, dear. All of us." In front of everybody, he studied me for a long moment across Walter's kitchen table, and I watched him decide, one last time, that there was nothing behind my eyes worth being afraid of. It was, I reflected as his taillights disappeared into the snow, the final mistake available to him. In the morning, he was going to walk into the room he'd built to erase me. And find out who had been decorating it all winter. The Harbor Glen probate courtroom is a small room. People imagine marble and gallery seats. What you get is beige paneling, a state flag that needs ironing, and radiators that knock like impatient knuckles. On a gray morning in January, with lake-effect snow ticking against the windows, that little room held everything I had built in the dark for 10 months. Judge Marion Okafor presiding. In the matter of Evelyn R. Marsh, an alleged incapacitated individual, I wore the blue cardigan. Dana chose it. "Soft colors," she'd said. "Let them underestimate you one last hour." It's been working all year. Derek arrived in his best closing the deal suit with his attorney. A smooth, efficient man named Pierce who had clearly been told this was a formality. You could see it in how lightly he carried his briefcase. Derek smiled at me across the aisle. Warm. Sad. Supportive. The full Sunday dinner face, worn to court. I gave him back the mild, foggy smile he'd spent a year purchasing, and I thought, enjoy it. It expires this morning. Pierce's presentation took most of the first hour, and I will grant him this, it was competently built, because Derek had supplied him with excellent materials. I had made most of them myself. There was the collapse and hospitalization, medical records duly admitted. There was the repeated baseball story at Sunday dinner. Dated, with Derek testifying to it in a voice that broke, actually broke, at the right moment. The keys in the pantry. The neighbor's name I couldn't summon. The morning I'd fumbled my own checkbook. Derek on the stand was magnificent. If you didn't know what you were looking at, the reluctant petitioner, the devoted son-in-law driven to the courthouse by love. "This is the hardest thing our family has ever done," he said, and dabbed at his eye, and I watched Judge Okafor make a note, her face giving away nothing at all, and then Pierce reached for the exhibit that told me Derek had never, not once, understood what he was at war with. "Your Honor, we'd also offer the observations of the respondent's own grandson." Statements, gathered by Derek, relayed through Derek's affidavit, Theo's little catalog of Grandma's bad days. She repeated a whole story. Dad says she gets confused. 12 years old, translated into evidence by the man who'd coached him. I want to be honest, that was the only moment of the morning my composure genuinely buckled. Not because it hurt the case, Dana was already rising to object to the hearsay, layers of it, but because of what it meant. He had walked my grandson into this building on paper. Theo himself was home, shielded, at my absolute insistence. His words had been brought here without him, like something taken from his room. Dana's objection was measured. Mine, internal, was not. Judge Okafor allowed the statements limited weight, noting for the record that they were second-hand accounts of a minor's coached recollections, her word, coached, arriving early and landing like the first crack in lake ice. Pierce moved on quickly. He rested before lunch, confident, and why not? Unopposed, his file described a sweet, diminishing widow who needed a guardian and, conveniently, already had a volunteer. Then it was our turn, and Dana Whitfield stood up in her gray suit and began, very politely, to take the room apart. She called me first. That was the gamble we'd argued about for weeks. Respondents often testify last, if at all, but Dana understood theater the way she understood statute. "The court has spent all morning hearing about you," she'd said. "Let it spend the afternoon hearing you." I walked to the stand without my performance. I left it in the aisle like a coat. And when I raised my right hand and swore the oath, I did it in my own voice, the deposition voice, the 11 federal trials voice, and I watched Pierce's head come up from his legal pad like a man who has heard a wrong note in a familiar song. Dana started gently. "Name, age, residence." Then, "Mrs. Marsh, what did you do professionally?" "I was a forensic fraud examiner for 31 years. I traced concealed assets and reconstructed fraudulent transactions. I testified as an expert witness in state and federal court 11 times. Do you know today's date? I gave it. The current balance, within $100, of your primary checking account as of the January statement. I gave it to the dollar, along with the statement date. Can you describe the durable power of attorney recorded in your name last spring? I recited its execution date, its notary, its recording number at the county, and the statutory citation printed on its first page, and then, because Dana had asked me to show rather than claim, I explained to the court, from memory, what a quitclaim deed is, what consideration of $1 signals, and what transaction structuring looks like in a bank ledger, using my own accounts as the teaching example. Somewhere in the middle of that answer, I heard a small sound to my left that I will keep until I die, Derek's pen, which had been scratching busy little notes all morning, going still. It did not move again. Then Dana asked the question the whole year had been aimed at, Mrs. Marsh. The court has heard testimony about repeated stories, misplaced keys, a fumbled checkbook. Did those incidents occur, every one of them? I said. Can you explain them? Yes. I staged them. The radiators knocked. Nobody else made a sound. Beginning in early autumn, after the petitioner filed to have me declared incapacitated, I deliberately performed episodes of mild confusion in his presence. I repeated the baseball story on purpose. I can repeat it again now, word for word, if the court would like. I placed my own keys in the pantry. I pretended to forget a neighbor I've known for 30 years. I kept a contemporaneous log of every performance, date, time, audience, and content. Dana was already handing up the notebook, the one that had lived taped beneath the third drawer of Walter's workbench. That log is in evidence. The court will notice that every incident described by the petitioner this morning appears in it, in my handwriting, dated before he reported it. Judge Okafor looked at the notebook for a long moment. Then she looked at me over her glasses. Mrs. Marsh, why would you do that? Because, Your Honor, I spent 31 years watching men like the petitioner, I said. And the one thing they cannot survive is a witness they've stopped being careful around. He needed me to be failing. So I failed, where he could see it, and nowhere else. My physicians will confirm I never once presented as confused in a clinical setting. What he did while he believed no competent person was watching is the rest of our case. The rest of our case took the afternoon, and it fell like weather, front after front, pressure after pressure, the storm I had watched forming on my dining room table finally arriving over Derek Lund. The certified records went first. Ray walking the court through them with the dry patience of a man who has authenticated 1,000 documents, the quitclaim deed conveying the West Shore property to Lundbridge Holdings LLC for $1, the LLC filings showing its single member, the power of attorney executed on day 6 of my hospitalization, cross-referenced against hospital records showing what was in my bloodstream that afternoon, and against the visitor log showing who brought the notary. Then the bank records. Dana's motion to compel had landed the week before, and Kittredge's long stall had bought Derek exactly nothing except a paper trail of the stall itself. 14 months of layered fees. The transfers that danced beneath $10,000. Laid out in a column that any judge who has ever handled a financial exploitation file can read at a glance. Judge Okafor read it at a glance, then the pharmacy custodian, with the refill history. Then my hospital admission labs. Dana put the two exhibits side by side on the projector, the fence post row of on-time refills, and the phrase markedly subtherapeutic, and asked the pharmacy witness one question: who signed for every one of these pickups in the 6 weeks before Mrs. Marsh's collapse? The answer went into the record in the witness's flat, professional voice, and I watched Pierce lean over and whisper to his client, and I watched his client not answer him. Then Priya. She walked to the stand in her good cardigan with the dented notebook in her hand, and she was the best witness of the day, better than me, because she owed nobody anything. She testified to her hiring, the second Tuesday of October, and to the typed medication schedule Derek had handed her, now Exhibit 31, and to her lifelong habit of checking schedules against bottles. The schedule did not match any prescription in the house, she said. Not the doses. Not the timing. Not one. She testified to 11 previous households and what cognitive decline actually looks like, and then to what she had observed instead: crosswords in pen, precise cooking, a woman who did not match her briefing. Pierce, on cross, made the mistake of suggesting she was a disgruntled employee. Priya considered him with those level eyes and said, "Mr. Lund paid me to watch her. I watched her. I am telling you what I saw. If that disappoints him, the problem is not my wages." Even the court reporter's mouth twitched. Then Whitcomb, colorless and devastating, with his enlargements, my daughter's true signature opening like a door, and 4 drawn imitations curling the wrong way, on the guardianship affidavit and on 3 recorded trust amendments. Highly probable that Chloe Lund's name was written by another hand. The same other hand, all 4 times, and then Dana said, "The respondent calls Chloe Lund." I had not looked at Derek much during the afternoon. Watching a man drown is not something I take pleasure in, whatever he'd earned. But I looked at him when his wife's name was called, because I needed to see whether he'd known. He hadn't. His head turned toward her the way you turn toward a sound in your own house at night, and for one unguarded second the salesman was gone entirely, and what sat in his chair was just a frightened man doing arithmetic that would not come out. Chloe crossed that little courtroom without looking at him once. She looked at me. She kept looking at me, through the oath, through the questions, through all of it, as if I were a shoreline. "Mrs. Lund, is this your signature on the affidavit supporting your husband's petition?" "No." "Did you authorize anyone to sign it?" "No." "I never saw that document until my mother showed it to me in a parking lot in December." Her voice was quiet and did not shake. "I have never believed my mother was incapacitated. I said so in this affidavit only because my husband wrote it and signed my name." Then her photographs went into evidence, the margin statements, the Lundbridge ledger, Sobel's draft listing agreement, and the unsigned letter of intent pricing my husband's house at almost exactly the size of the hole in Derek's client accounts. Dana asked her one final question: "Why are you here today?" "Mrs. Lund." Chloe was silent for a moment. Then, "Because he used my name to call my mother incompetent. She's the most competent person I have ever met. Somebody in this family should say that under oath." Pierce did not cross-examine her. There was nothing in that direction but rubble. He tried, in closing, the only argument left, that whatever irregularities the court had heard, they were matters for other proceedings. Today's narrow question was capacity. It was technically correct and totally hopeless, because the respondent he needed to be incapacitated had spent the afternoon citing statute from the witness stand. Judge Okafor ruled from the bench. She did not need long. She found by clear and convincing evidence, she noted, dryly, that the standard ran the other way and had not been remotely met, that Evelyn R. Marsh was not an incapacitated individual, and dismissed the petition with prejudice. Then she kept talking, and the room got very quiet in a new way. She found that the evidence presented raised substantial questions of forgery, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and fraud upon the court. She ordered the record certified and referred to the county prosecutor's office. She entered an injunction freezing any transfer, sale, or encumbrance of the West Shore property and voiding recordation of further instruments under the challenged power of attorney pending review. And she looked at Derek, really looked at him, the way I imagined she'd looked at 100 confident men in nice suits, and advised him, on the record, that he might wish to consult counsel regarding his own exposure, and that nothing required him to make any statement. No handcuffs. No gavel crack thunder. That's television. What actually happens is quieter and, I promise you, worse: a court reporter's keys ticking your name into a referral, a judge's clerk stamping the file, and every powerful friend you have in the county learning by dinnertime which way the wind has turned. Derek sat very still while the machinery of the thing he'd built closed around him, and Pierce packed the light briefcase that had gotten so heavy since morning. It was over by 4. The snow had stopped. In the corridor outside, under fluorescent lights and a bulletin board of foreclosure notices, Chloe stood with Dana and Ray and Priya, and I was walking toward them, toward my people, toward the rest of my life, when Derek stepped out of the courtroom behind me. "Evelyn," I stopped. I turned. We stood 6 feet apart in an emptying hallway, the two of us, for the first time since a voice came through a hospital door. He looked at me for a long moment, at the blue cardigan, at the eyes with no fog in them anywhere, and when he spoke, it was barely above a whisper, and it was, I believe, the only fully honest sentence he'd said in 14 months. "You were never sick a day, were you?" I let him have the silence he'd earned. Then I gave him the truth, the whole year of it, in the only size he deserved. "One day, Derek," I said. "You gave me one." I spent the rest of them counting, and I walked down the corridor to my daughter, and I did not look back at him, because there was nothing behind me worth being afraid of. Justice, when it finally arrives, does not arrive like the movies. It arrives like mail. Through the spring, the envelopes came. The county prosecutor's office moved the way counties move, slowly, then all at once. In April, a grand jury returned an indictment, 2 counts of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. 4 counts of forgery, 1 count of uttering and publishing, and a count I had to explain to Chloe over the phone, related to false statements in a court filing. Derek surrendered himself on a Tuesday morning with a new attorney, one who did not carry his briefcase lightly. He was released on bond the same day. That's how it actually works. No perp walk. Just a man in a good coat coming down courthouse steps into a life that no longer recognized him. The securities regulators moved faster than the courts, the way they do when client money is involved. By May, his license was gone. The practice dissolved. Lundbridge Holdings LLC was unwound by court order, the quitclaim deed set aside as the product of a void power of attorney. And one bright morning in June a title clerk in that same beige building stamped Walter's house back where it belonged. Dana restructured everything afterward. The property and the accounts went into my revocable living trust, and I named Chloe successor trustee, with real signatures this time, all 3 of us in Dana's office watching the C and her name open like a door, over and over, the way it was supposed to. In the fall, Derek took a plea. Restitution came first, the fees, the transfers, the legal costs, satisfied through the forced sale of his own assets, including, and I confessed the symmetry did not escape me, a boat. The prosecutor asked if I wanted to give a victim impact statement at the sentencing hearing. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I wrote drafts. I had things to say, believe me, I had 14 months of things to say, and a courtroom is the one place where they'd have to sit still and hear them. I declined. People were surprised, Ray most of all. But here is what I knew that the drafts kept forgetting. I had already said everything, under oath, in January, in the room Derek built for the purpose. The record existed. Adding fury to it would have been for me, not for justice, and I had watched too many victims mistake the last word for the last laugh. Besides, and this is the part one only admitted to the notebook, Theo would someday be old enough to read every public word of this case. And I wanted my grandson to find, at the end of it, a grandmother who won and then stopped. The sentence came down without my help, a term of years, part suspended, some of it to be served, the number less important than the fact of it. He is not a monster in a cage. He is a man in a jumpsuit answering to a corrections officer instead of a golf foursome, and his charm, I'm told, is worth about what contraband cigarettes are. Chloe filed for divorce in February, before the indictment even landed. She and Theo moved into the lake house with me for a season. She called it, just until school lets out, and then it was, just through the summer, and neither of us corrected the arithmetic. I would not trade those months. My daughter grieving a marriage in one room while learning she could stand in another, the 2 of us doing dishes in a kitchen where a man once slid a folio across the table, the slow return of her laugh, which showed up first as a startled sound, like a bird coming back to a feeder it had abandoned. She carried guilt that wasn't hers, the way good people do. I handed you to him, she said one night on the porch. Every decision, I looked at him first. You saw me do it. I told her the truth, which is that we had both been read by a professional, and that being deceived by an expert is not a character flaw, it's a crime with a victim. She's rebuilding in inches. She went back to school in the fall, of all things, for accounting. She claims it's a coincidence. I have never once believed a coincidence in my life, and I'm not starting with my own daughter. Theo took longer, because 12-year-olds are owed the truth in sizes they can carry, and his father had already handed him lies in adult sizes. We told him what we could, that Dad broke serious laws, that Grandma was never sick, that none of it, not 1 minute of it, was Theo's fault, including the bad days he'd been coached to remember. He was quiet for a while about all of it. He kept coming on Saturdays. The chess got better, the peanut butter consumption held steady, then one afternoon in late summer, out on the porch with the board between us, he asked the question I'd been waiting for since January, "Grandma, is Dad a bad man?" I had rehearsed answers to that question the way I'd once rehearsed confusion, and sitting there, I threw every rehearsal out. "Here's what I know," I said. "Your dad did bad things. Real ones, that hurt people, and he did them on purpose, for a long time. He's also the man who taught you to throw a curveball and stayed up all night when you had pneumonia in 2nd grade. Both of those are true, and you don't have to pick one. You get to love him and be angry at him and not trust him, all at the same time, for as long as you need. That's not being confused. That's being honest." He moved a night. He thought about it. And then he said, "He never let me win at chess. You always noticed when I let you have the rooks." Which is, I think, the most precise verdict anyone delivered in this entire case. He splits holidays now. He visits his father where his father is, with Chloe driving, and comes home quiet, and we let him be quiet. Some accounts stay open a long time, the others found their places too. Priya's last day as my aide was, technically, the day the petition died, but she came to Sunday dinner the following week as a guest, and has missed maybe 4 since. She sits where Derek used to sit. Nobody planned that, the table just healed that way. Her daughter graduated in the spring, and we all drove downstate for it, and Priya cried exactly 1 tear, wiped it once, efficiently, and said, "The sun." Dana sends a holiday card with a heron on it. And on a Friday in October, in the last booth at the Blue Heron, Ray and I closed the file the way we'd closed 100 others, final document squared, the box lid fitted, 2 coffees going cold while neither of us said anything important. "You know what the difference was," Ray said finally. "Between this one and all the others, this one was mine, no." He tapped the box. "The others, we showed up after." This time the victim was the examiner. First case I ever worked where the crime scene fought back. He signaled for pie. Walter would have liked that, Walter. Yes. That's the last thing, and I saved it because I saved it in life, too. In September, on a warm evening with the lake flat as a held breath, I took the brass key off its leather cord by the back door, the key I had not been able to touch for 3 years, and I walked down to the boat shed, and I opened it. It smelled like him. Sawdust and motor oil and lake. The workbench with the 3rd drawer where my notebook had lived all winter, keeping our secrets in his furniture. Half-organized shelves, a project vice still gripping a piece of cherry he never finished, his handwriting on masking tape labels, screws, misc. "Ask Evelyn." I stood in the doorway for a long time. And I understood, finally, why I hadn't been able to open it before. It wasn't that the shed held his absence. It's that it held him mid-sentence, a life interrupted, tools down, coming right back, and for 3 years I could not bear to stand inside an unfinished thing. I can now. I spent the winter finishing an unfinished thing. I know how it's done, I go down there most evenings. I organized the screws. I have not moved the cherry out of the vise, and I'm not going to, so that's the story, or the part of it that fits in words. But before I let you go, I owe you the piece I've never said out loud, not to Chloe, not to Ray. Not even to the notebook. The performance taught me something I didn't want to learn. For 4 months, I moved through the world as a woman people believed was fading. And the world showed me, with terrible efficiency, exactly how it treats her. The elevated voices. The decisions made a foot above my head. The way a repeated story turns you transparent, how fast people stop asking what you think and start discussing what to do about you, while you are sitting right there. Derek was the criminal. But the machinery he used, the assumptions, the shortcuts, the readiness of everyone to believe an old woman was finished, that machinery was already installed, in the hospital, in the bank. In my own family, waiting for any man smooth enough to operate it. I only beat him because I'd spent 31 years learning to see machinery. Most women in that hospital bed never had my training. I think about them. I'll be honest, I think about them more than I think about Derek. 14 months after it started, I was back at Harbor Glen Memorial, a routine checkup, my numbers boringly perfect, my regular doctor reading the chart and finding nothing to say. And walking out, I passed a closed door in the cardiac wing, 6 inches of blonde laminate exactly like mine had been, with voices on the other side. Family voices, low and warm and deciding something. I stopped for a second. I couldn't help it. Somewhere behind a door like that, there is always a woman lying very still, listening to the people she loves describe a version of her she has never met. I hope she's listening the way I listened. I hope her hands go still and cold and certain, because here is how the file actually closes. They walked into a courtroom carrying sworn papers that said Evelyn Marsh could no longer manage her own life. And the record, certified, stamped, and permanent now, in a beige building that smells like toner, shows in exact and public detail how thoroughly she managed it. The first time I heard the word, it came through 6 inches of hospital door, wrapped in my son-in-law's warmest voice, guardianship. I was 68 years old, flat on my back in Harbor Glen Memorial with a heart monitor counting out my life in small green beeps, and on the other side of that door, Derek was talking to a hospital social worker about me the way you'd talk about a car that wasn't worth fixing. He was gentle about it. Derek was gentle about everything. That was the thing nobody understood until it was almost too late. The softest voice in the room is sometimes the one holding the knife. We just want to make sure she's protected, he said. The family's been worried for a while now. The family. I lay there with an 4 in my arm and listened to a man describe a version of me I had never met. A woman who wandered. A woman who forgot. A woman whose family had been worried for a while now. And here is the part I'm not proud of, I didn't push the call button. I didn't demand he come in and say it to my face. I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep, because some cold, patient thing at the bottom of my brain, the thing that used to pay my salary, whispered a single instruction: listen. Don't let them know you're listening. My name is Evelyn Marsh. For 31 years, I was a forensic fraud examiner. I spent my career pulling apart the finances of men exactly like the one standing outside my hospital room, men who never stole anything. Exactly, who only ever moved things, managed things, protected things, until one day the people they were protecting looked up and owned nothing at all. I testified in federal court 11 times. I once found a $9 million embezzlement hiding inside a church's coffee budget. People used to ask me how I did it, and I always gave the same answer. Most people read a bank statement the way they read a room, quickly, politely, seeing what they expect to see. I was trained to do the opposite. I read rooms the way I read bank statements. Every smile is a line item. Every kindness has a source and a destination. I want you to remember that, because for 2 full years, I forgot it myself. It started, like most disasters in my life, with a calendar. Early spring, a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were for the farmer's market, and I never made it there. I was standing at my kitchen counter in the lake house, reaching for the kettle, and then the floor came up to meet me like an old friend. There was no pain. That's what frightened me most, afterward. Just a gray curtain coming down, and the sound of the kettle rolling somewhere far away, and then fluorescent lights and a paramedic asking me what year it was. They kept me 9 days. Blood pressure crisis, they said. Dangerously erratic. Nearly a stroke. The doctors seemed puzzled. My numbers had been stable for a decade, but bodies are strange at my age. And puzzled doctors reach for the nearest explanation the same way tired auditors do. They wrote it up, adjusted my prescriptions, and moved on, and for 9 days, my family orbited that hospital bed, and I will tell you honestly, it was the most loved I had felt since Walter died. Walter. 2 years gone by then. 41 years married. He built our house on the west shore of the lake with his own hands and a temper he saved exclusively for lumber that wouldn't cooperate. When he died, quietly, unfairly, in his sleep, he left me the house, the boat shed he'd never quite finished organizing, and a brass key on a leather cord that I hung by the back door and could not bring myself to touch. Some widows talk to their husbands' photographs. I couldn't even open his shed. Grief is its own kind of locked room, and I'd decided the way through mine was order. Routine. Competence. I balanced my accounts weekly. I kept my files alphabetized. I did the crossword in pen. I built a fortress out of small correct things, and I dared the world to find a crack in it. The world sent Derek. Let me be fair to him, because fairness is what makes this story hurt. Derek Lund was easy to love. 41, handsome in a golf catalog way, a financial planner with his own small practice and a laugh that arrived early and stayed late. When my daughter Chloe married him, I cried actual tears of relief. Because Chloe had spent her 20s collecting men who treated her like a rest stop, and here, finally, was one who opened doors, remembered birthdays, coached their son's baseball team. My grandson Theo worshipped him. 12 years old, all elbows and cowlicks, and every Saturday he'd ride his bike the 2 miles to my house, eat me out of peanut butter, and beat me at chess while pretending he wasn't letting me have his rooks. Theo was mine. Whatever else happened, Saturdays were Theo's and mine, and Chloe, my Chloe was tired. I could see it that spring in the hospital, the way she sat in the corner chair answering work emails with one hand and holding my water cup with the other. 38 years old and stretched across her whole life like too little butter over bread. When decisions came up, my discharge plan, my prescriptions, the insurance forms, she'd glance at Derek. Just a flick of the eyes. He'll handle it. He handled everything. He'd been handling things for 2 years by then, ever since the funeral, when he'd taken my hands in the church parking lot and said, "Evelyn, you should not have to think about money right now. Let me carry that for you. It's literally my job," and I let him. That's the confession at the center of everything. The woman who'd caught a $9 million fraud in a coffee budget handed her own portfolio to her son-in-law. Because she was tired and sad, and because he was kind, and because saying yes to Derek felt like being taken care of, and I hadn't been taken care of since Walter's heart stopped. He consolidated my accounts. He set up automatic everything. Every quarter, he'd come by with a folder of glossy statements and a bottle of the Pinot I liked, and he'd walk me through charts that always pointed gently upward, and I'd nod and sign where the little arrow stickers told me to sign. Every smile is a line item. I know, the 9 days in the hospital, I remember in fragments, and the fragments matter, so pay attention to their edges. I remember Derek's voice reading the heart monitor's rhythm like it was background music. Warm and steady, telling me not to worry about a thing. I remember a notary. I want to be precise, I remember a woman with a stamp and a clipboard on either day 6 or day 7, when my blood pressure medication had me floating somewhere near the ceiling tiles, and I remember Derek saying it was routine, updating beneficiary paperwork, protecting me, and I remember the pen feeling too heavy and my signature coming out looking like someone else's. I remember Chloe wasn't there that day. I remember thinking that was odd, and then not thinking at all, because the fog rolled back in. They discharged me on a Thursday. Derek drove me home himself, carried my bag in, put my new prescriptions in a cheerful blue pill organizer he'd bought, days of the week in little plastic doors, and set it on my kitchen counter where the kettle used to be. I refilled everything and sorted it all, he said, kissing the top of my head like I was Theo's age. You just rest. The family's got you. For 3 weeks, I rested. I healed. I told myself the fog was lifting, then the letter came. It was from Lakeshore First Savings, addressed to me, and it was nothing, a courtesy notification, the kind of paper most people drop straight in the recycling. Thank you for your recent changes to your account services. Your updated mailing preferences have taken effect. Statements would now be delivered electronically. To an email address I didn't recognize, printed helpfully at the bottom. An address with my name in it, evelyn.marsh.trust, that I had never created. Never seen, never used. I stood in my front hall and read that letter 4 times, and I want to describe to you exactly what I felt, because it wasn't fear. Not yet. It was recognition. It was the same sensation I used to get on the 9th hour of an audit, deep in someone's ledgers, when a number sat half a degree off true, the little cold prickle at the base of the skull that always arrived before the proof did. My hands knew before I did. They'd gone very still, the way they used to over a suspicious invoice, and then I did what I am most ashamed of. I explained it away. Derek streamlined things. You probably agreed to it in the hospital. You've been foggy, Evelyn. You collapsed in your own kitchen. Maybe you don't remember everything you signed. And underneath those explanations, doing the real work, was the ugliest thought of all: if you make a fuss and you're wrong, they'll think you're slipping. They'll look at you the way people look at old women who make fusses. Don't give them a reason. I put the letter in a drawer. I made tea. I called it nothing. It stopped being nothing that same night. I keep my files in Walter's old oak cabinet in the den, taxes, deeds, insurance, the whole architecture of a life, in folders I have maintained in strict alphabetical order since the Carter administration. Order was my fortress, remember. I know that cabinet the way a pianist knows a keyboard. And when I opened the second drawer that evening to file the bank letter, just to file it, I told myself, not because the prickle was still there, not because my hands were still too still, the drawer told me a story in half a second flat. The folders were neat. They were upright. They were in order. And they were wrong. The tension was off. Files lean differently when they've been lifted out and put back, the way books do, the way anything does that has been in hands that aren't yours. Homeowners had a soft crease at the corner it had never had. Property, house sat a quarter-inch prouder than its neighbors, like a witness who's rehearsed. Someone had gone through this cabinet. Carefully, patiently, and put everything back almost perfectly, almost. I stood there in the lamplight and made myself count the drawer the way I'd count a cash box. Taxes, insurance, utilities, medical, deed records, Walter's estate papers. My finger walked the tabs one at a time, and between property, house and retirement accounts, my finger stopped in an empty quarter-inch of air. One folder was gone, the folder with the original deed to the lake house, Walter's house, the one he built board by board above the water, was not there. And the little cold prickle at the base of my skull finally finished its sentence, the one it had been trying to say since a voice came through 6 inches of hospital door. They weren't worried about you, Evelyn. They were inventorying you. I did not sleep that night, and I did not panic either. Panic is loud. What settled over me instead was something quieter and older, the feeling of a case opening. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad and Walter's reading lamp, I stopped being a widow who might be slipping and started being what I had been for 31 years. I wrote one line at the top of the pad, the same line I used to write at the start of every engagement: assume nothing. Verify everything. Tell no one who doesn't need to know. The first problem was access. My statements had been rerouted to an email address that wasn't mine. Which meant the paper trail now flowed past me, not to me. But banks are like rivers, you can't stop them from leaving sediment. The next morning I put on the good coat, drove myself to the Lakeshore First Branch on Cedar Street, smiled like a harmless grandmother, and asked the young man at the desk to print me 12 months of statements for all my accounts. For my taxes, I said. My accountant is old-fashioned. He likes paper. The young man laughed and printed them, because nobody suspects the woman who jokes about being old-fashioned. I have never in my life been old-fashioned. I walked out with 14 months of my own financial life in a manila envelope, and my hands didn't shake until I got to the car. That afternoon, I spread the pages across the dining room table where Walter and I used to host Thanksgiving, and I read my own accounts the way I used to read a stranger's. Here is what most people don't understand about fraud. It isn't a lightning strike. It's weather. It moves in systems, in fronts, in patterns of pressure, and if you've spent your life watching the sky, you can see a storm forming in numbers the way a farmer sees one forming over the lake. What I found on my dining room table was weather. It started small, 11 months back. A line item called an administrative service fee, $190, drafted monthly to something abbreviated LBHMGMT. Reasonable. Boring. Exactly the kind of charge a trusting client never questions, because Derek managed my money and managers charge fees. Except 3 months in, a second fee appeared. Portfolio oversight, $410. Then a quarterly consolidation charge. Then something called a fiduciary maintenance draw that took $1,100 in a month where, as far as I could tell, the only thing anyone had maintained was the fiction. Each individual charge was defensible. Each one was sized to be ignored. But laid out in a row, month over month, they did what layered fees always do, they climbed. By my count, in 11 months, a little over $31,000 had walked out of my accounts in amounts specifically calibrated to stay beneath an old woman's attention. And there was something else, something that told me I wasn't dealing with an amateur. Transfers out of my money market account, to LBHMGMT again, in odd, irregular amounts. $9,400. $8,750. $9,200. Never a round number. Never the same number twice. And never, not once, over $10,000, I sat back in my chair and heard my own voice from a deposition 20 years ago, explaining to a jury what structuring looks like. Amounts that dance just under reporting thresholds aren't accidents. They're fingerprints. Somebody at that table knew exactly which lines trip a bank's attention, and was stepping over every one of them like a man who'd memorized where the creaky floorboards were. That was the moment it stopped hurting and started clarifying. A sloppy thief is family who lost their way. A careful thief is a predator who found his. I didn't know yet which one Derek was. But the statements were leaning. I also knew, sitting there, exactly what I could not do. I could not call Chloe. I could not drive to their house, slap the pages on Derek's granite countertop, and demand answers, even though every cell in my body wanted the catharsis of watching his face when he realized who he'd stolen from. Because I had watched confrontation destroy more cases than incompetence ever did. You confront a man like Derek with partial evidence, and 3 things happen by sundown: the records get amended. The shredder gets fed, and the story gets ahead of you. And the story he would tell was already loaded and aimed. Poor Evelyn. The collapse changed her. She's paranoid now, accusing family. It's so sad. My accusation wouldn't be evidence of his crime. It would be Exhibit A in the case for my confusion. No. You don't confront weather. You document it, but I couldn't do it alone, and I knew it. I was one records request away from tipping him. Derek had spent 15 years shaking hands at every bank and title office in the county. The man sent the branch manager's kids' birthday cards. I needed hands that weren't mine, eyes he'd never met, and a brain that had done this before. Which is how, that Friday, I ended up in the last booth at the Blue Heron Diner out on Route 12, across from Ray Ortiz. Ray and I worked fraud cases together for 19 years, me on the ledgers, him on the people. He'd been an investigator with the state before he retired, the kind who could interview a suspect for an hour about fishing and walk out knowing where the money was. He was 70 now, wore the same canvas jacket he'd worn since the 90s, and had been eating breakfast at the Blue Heron every Friday since his wife passed. I hadn't seen him in almost 2 years. I slid the manila envelope across the table before I even said hello. Ray didn't touch it. He looked at the envelope. Then at me, and said, "Personal or professional, both, that's the worst kind." He pulled out his reading glasses, opened the envelope, and went quiet for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 because I watched the clock over the pie case, the way you do when someone is reading your life. The waitress refilled our coffees twice. Finally Ray set down the last page, took off his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Who's LBH?" he asked. "That's the question." "No," Ray said, and his voice had dropped into the register I remembered from 100 case rooms. "The question is who taught him to structure. Because this isn't a guy dipping into grandma's purse, Evie. This is a professional burning down his own house slowly enough that the neighbors think it's a fireplace. He tapped the transfer column. Somebody's drowning. People don't move money like this unless the water's already at their chin. What do you know about your son-in-law's finances? Glossy folders, I said. Charts that point up, his charts, or yours. Neither of us said anything for a moment, because we both already knew. We split the work the way we always had. I would handle the paper I could reach without leaving footprints, my own accounts, my own tax records, my own memory of 9 foggy days in the hospital, written down in detail before it faded further. Ray would handle everything that required a stranger's face. Public records. Corporate filings. And the county recorder's office, because if a folder containing a deed goes missing from a widow's filing cabinet, the first thing you check is whether the deed itself has been busy. It took Ray 4 days, and he insisted I come with him for the last part, because he said I'd need to see it myself, and he was right. The Register of Deeds for the county operates out of a beige municipal building that smells like toner in 1974. Ray had already pulled the index. He walked me to a public terminal in the corner, typed in the parcel number for the West Shore property, the number I knew by heart because Walter used to recite it like a phone number, and turned the screen toward me. There it was, in cold clerk's type, the way the worst news always arrives. No thunder. Just a grantor line and a grantee line. Grantor, Marsh, Evelyn R., grantee, Lundbridge Holdings LLC, recorded 8 weeks ago. A quitclaim deed, transferring Walter's lake house, the porch he leveled 3 times because the sightline to the water bothered him, the boat shed with the brass key I still couldn't touch, into a limited liability company I had never heard of, for the stated consideration of $1, Lundbridge. Lund. He hadn't even worked hard on the name. That was the detail that made my jaw ache, standing in that fluorescent-lit office. The arrogance of it. He'd wrapped his own name around my husband's house like a return address label, because it never occurred to him that anyone would look, because the only person in the family who knew how to look was the confused old woman he was managing. Registered agent is a filing service in Lansing, Ray said quietly beside me. Single member. Guess who? But it was the attached instrument that stopped my breath. The transfer had been executed not by me, but on my behalf, by my attorney in fact, under a durable power of attorney, duly notarized, granting Derek Lund broad authority over my property and finances. I made the clerk print the whole thing. I stood at the counter and read the execution date, and the beige room went very far away. It was dated in early spring. Day 6 of my hospitalization. The day of the woman with the stamp and the clipboard. The day the pen was too heavy. The day my signature came out looking like someone else's, because the woman who signed it barely existed. He hadn't stolen my house with a crowbar. He'd stolen it with my own floating, medicated hand, in a room where the machine said I was alive and the paperwork said I agreed. I don't remember walking to Ray's truck. I remember sitting in the passenger seat with the certified copies in my lap, and Ray letting the silence sit as long as it needed to, the way he always did with victims. Then he said, "We do this right, Evie. Certified copies of everything, today, before anything gets amended. Chain of custody from minute 1. You still remember how to build a file?" "I remember," I said. And I did. My grief had a job now, and the job steadied me the way the ledgers always had, for 2 weeks. We built it. Quietly. Certified copies of the deed, the POA, the LLC filings. My bank statements, tabbed and cross-indexed. A timeline of the hospital week reconstructed from visitor logs and my own notes. We paid cash at the copy shop 2 towns over. We spoke on Ray's landline. I smiled at Sunday dinner and complimented Derek's pot roast and watched him top off my wine, and I noticed, now that I was finally reading the room like a bank statement, the things I'd been refusing to see. The half-second delay before Chloe answered any question about money. The way Derek's phone never left his pocket, even at the table, and how it buzzed all through dinner like something trapped. The new lines around my daughter's eyes that had nothing to do with her mother's health. I told myself I was 2 weeks away. 2 more weeks of quiet documentation, and I'd have a file no lawyer could ignore, and I would choose the time and the ground. Derek chose first. It came on a gray Tuesday, in the hand of a mail carrier who made me sign for it, a certified letter, law office return address, my name typed with a formality that read like a verdict. I opened it standing in the same front hall where the bank letter had found me, and this time there was no explaining anything away, in the matter of Evelyn R. Marsh, an alleged incapacitated individual. A petition had been filed in county probate court. The petitioner, Derek Lund, respectfully requested the appointment of a guardian and conservator, on the grounds that I was no longer able to manage my property and affairs, citing my collapse, my confusion, my declining condition as observed by concerned family. A hearing would be scheduled. I had the right to counsel. I had the right to object. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was legalizing, and then I turned to the supporting affidavit, the sworn statement attesting to my decline, page after page of a woman I'd never been, forgetting names, losing days, a danger to her own accounts, and I reached the signature block at the bottom, and the front hall tilted, there, beneath the words sworn and subscribed. In blue ink, was my daughter's name, Chloe Lund. I stood in the front hall holding my daughter's name and let 2 possibilities fight each other in my chest. The first one said Chloe knew, that my daughter had sat with a lawyer and sworn under oath that her mother was crumbling, that the whole family, not just Derek, had voted me diminished. The second possibility whispered something quieter and stranger. Something about the C in her name that sat a little too carefully on the line. I'd deposed enough forgers to know you can't trust that whisper without proof. Hope makes terrible handwriting analysis. So I did the only thing I could do with it. I put both possibilities in the file. Unresolved, and I called the number Ray had given me weeks earlier, written on the back of a blue heron receipt like it was nothing. Dana Whitfield. Elder Law. If it ever gets legal, Evie, you call her before you call anyone. Dana Whitfield practiced out of a converted craftsman house in Traverse City, 90 minutes north, far enough, Ray had said, that her name would mean nothing at any dinner table in Harbor Glen. She was maybe 55, silver-streaked, with the handshake of a woman who had spent 30 years being underestimated in probate courtrooms and had learned to enjoy it. She read my file in silence for most of an hour. Then she stacked the pages, squared the edges, and gave it to me straight, which is the only way I take anything. First, the good news. A guardianship petition isn't a verdict, it's an accusation. He has to prove you're incapacitated, in a courtroom, with evidence, and you have the right to contest, the right to counsel, and the right to your own evaluation. Contested guardianships are winnable. She tapped the petition. Now the bad news. He's not stupid. He filed first, which means he controls the story. He's got a documented collapse, a hospitalization, medication changes, and a year of quietly managing your money to point at. If you walk into that courtroom next winter as an angry woman accusing her beloved son-in-law of theft, his attorney will feed you to the court as paranoia with a pulse. Anger reads as symptoms, Mrs. Marsh. It's ugly and it's unfair and it's how these hearings work. Then what wins? Evidence. Overwhelming, boring, certified, dated evidence, and a respondent so demonstrably sharp that the petition embarrasses the man who filed it. She leaned back. The question is what he does between now and the hearing. Men like this get careless when they think they've already won. If he believed the hearing was a formality. She let it hang there, watching me, and I understood that she was not going to be the one to say it out loud, because officers of the court don't advise clients to run deceptions. So I said it for her. You're telling me the strongest thing I can give you is a confident opponent. I'm telling you, Dana said carefully, that nothing in the law requires you to correct his assumptions. I drove home along the lake with the windows cracked, and somewhere around the Elk Rapids Bridge, the plan finished assembling itself. Derek's entire scheme rested on one load-bearing belief, that I was fading. Every document he'd filed, every fee he'd skimmed, every quiet conversation with a social worker, all of it worked only if Evelyn Marsh was a diminishing woman. He needed me confused. He was invested in me confused, so I decided to give him exactly what he was paying for. I want to be honest about what it cost, because people hear this part of the story and think it sounds clever, even fun. It was not fun. I had spent 2 years terrified of exactly this, of the day my family would look at me and see an expiration date. That fear was the crack Derek had crawled in through. And now I was going to take my deepest humiliation, polish it, and wear it like a costume. The first time I practiced in the bathroom mirror, letting my eyes go soft, letting a sentence trail off into fog, I had to grip the sink, because the woman looking back was the woman I'd been running from since Walter died. Then I straightened up, and I made rules. I'd learned from watching 100 liars fail, amateurs improvise. Professionals rehearse. Rule 1, never perform for doctors. Physicians document, and documents outlive performances. With medical people I would be precisely, boringly myself. Rule 2, small and rare beats big and often. No wandering in nightgowns, no forgetting my own name. Just soft, deniable fog, a repeated story, a lost word, keys in the freezer. Rule 3, every act gets logged. Date, time, audience, performance, in a notebook that lived taped under the third drawer of Walter's workbench, because if this ever reached a courtroom, I would need to prove which confusions were mine. And Rule 4, the one I underlined twice. Never, ever perform for Theo. The debut was a Sunday dinner in early autumn. Chloe made chicken and pretended everything was normal, which told me she knew about the petition and couldn't look at me, which told me nothing about the signature, and the not knowing sat in my throat all through the meal. Halfway through, I told a story about Theo's baseball game, a good story, warm, specific. Then, 20 minutes later, I told it again. Word for word. Same little laugh in the same place. The table went quiet in a very particular way. Chloe's fork stopped. Theo frowned. And Derek, I watched him over the rim of my water glass, because this was the whole experiment. Derek's face did something I will never forget. Concern arrived on schedule, warm and immediate. But underneath it, for a quarter of a second, before the mask settled, there was something that lived in the same neighborhood as relief. Satisfaction, almost. The look of a man watching a forecast come true. You told us that one already, Evelyn, he said gently, covering my hand with his. But it's a good one, did I? I let my eyes drift. Oh. Well. It was a good game. That night I wrote in the hidden notebook, first performance. Audience bought it. He wanted to buy it. And then, because notebooks are where you're allowed to bleed, Chloe looked frightened. For me or of this, unknown, after that, I fed the fire a twig at a time. I called Derek once to ask a question he'd already answered. I let him find my car keys in the pantry, next to the soup. I paused, twice, on the name of a neighbor I'd known for 30 years. Small. Rare. Deniable. And Derek bloomed. That's the only word for it. The tension he'd been carrying since he filed, the buzzing phone, the tight jaw, visibly drained out of him as the evidence of my decline mounted so cooperatively. He got warmer. Breezier. He started talking to me in the smooth, elevated volume people use on the very old, narrating my own kitchen to me. There were moments, when no one else was in the room, that the warmth dropped entirely and something flat and businesslike moved his hands. The day I fumbled the checkbook deliberately and he took it from me a half-second too fast. Not like a caretaker, like a repossession. I logged that 2 weeks into the performance, he made his next move, and it arrived smiling. Her name was Priya, and Derek presented her at my kitchen door like a gift, a part-time home aide, 3 days a week, just so someone's around, for our peace of mind. I understood immediately what she actually was. She was surveillance. A hired witness who would live inside my house and generate exactly the kind of neutral third-party observations his attorney would need. I noted her start date, the second Tuesday of October, in the notebook, and prepared to be watched. Here's what Derek got wrong, and it's the mistake his kind always makes. He assumed anyone he paid belonged to him, Priya was around 40, quick-eyed, economical with words, and she carried a small dented notebook of her own in her cardigan pocket. She wrote everything down, times, meals, medications, in tight careful script, a habit from nursing school in Kochi that no employer had ever managed to break. For the first week, I performed for her too, mildly, and she wrote her neutral notes. But you cannot share a kitchen with a person 3 days a week and stay strangers, and I did not try. I learned about her daughter studying engineering downstate. She learned I made better chai than she expected from a Midwestern white woman. A compliment she delivered with the gravity of a court ruling. And slowly I noticed that Priya's eyes did something Derek's never did, they lingered on things that didn't add up. On the crossword done in pen. On the way I diced an onion. On the gap between the woman Derek had described at hiring and the woman across the counter. She never said anything. She just wrote in the little notebook. And I began, cautiously, to hope that whatever she was writing was the truth. Meanwhile, Derek accelerated, exactly as Dana had predicted. Confident men create paper. In late October, my neighbor across the cove mentioned, apologetically, that she'd seen a man photographing my house from a boat. A week later, Ray's contact confirmed it. Derek had met twice with a listing broker, a lakefront specialist named Gary Sobel out of Charlevoix, about bringing a West Shore property to market in the spring, quietly, off the multiple listings, priced to move. He was measuring my husband's house for sale while I was still living in it. The rage that went through me when Ray told me was so clean and so cold it felt almost like health. But it was also, professionally speaking, wonderful. Every email to that broker, every walkthrough, every draft listing was fresh evidence, dated after the petition, showing what the guardianship was actually for. I asked Ray to document everything Sobel touched. The file thickened, then came the night the whole performance nearly died on my living room floor, and the reason was the person I loved most. It was a Saturday. Theo's Saturday. We'd kept our ritual through everything, peanut butter, chess, his running commentary on middle school politics, and those afternoons were the only hours of my week when I was entirely myself. That was the flaw in my design. I had built a wall between the performance and Theo, and walls create seams. He'd brought a logic puzzle from his math class, one of those grid elimination monsters his teacher gave for extra credit, and he was stuck, and I was tired, and my guard was down where it was always down, with him. I took the pencil. And for 4 silent minutes, the retired fraud examiner ate that puzzle alive, 5 constraints deep, no notes, narrating the eliminations out loud the way I used to narrate ledger tricks to juries. I looked up and Theo was staring at me, not smiling. Staring. 12 years old, all elbows and cowlicks, and thinking. I could watch him thinking. "Grandma," he said slowly, "Dad says you're getting really forgetful now. Like, he told me not to be sad if you can't do stuff anymore." A pause that lasted a geological age. "But you just did that whole thing in your head." Every clock in the house got loud. "I want you to understand exactly what was balanced on the next 10 seconds. If I told him the truth, I was handing a courtroom secret to a 7th grader who lived with Derek Lund, an honest, transparent kid whose face broadcast everything he felt. If I lied to him, if I went foggy and vague and let him watch his grandmother dissolve on cue, I would be doing to Theo the exact thing Derek was doing to all of us. Using his trust as material, I put down the pencil, and I chose the narrowest true path I could find. "Theo. Look at me. Do I seem sick to you?" "No, some days are better than other days," I said. "Today is a very good day. And I need you to hear something, and I need you to keep it just between us, like a chess move you don't announce." I held his eyes. "Your grandmother is okay. Whatever you hear. I am okay, and I will always be okay where you're concerned. Can you hold on to that without asking me why yet?" He studied me the way he studies the board when he suspects a trap, and then he nodded, slowly, and said, "Is this like when you sacrifice the queen but it's actually fine?" "It is exactly like that," I said, and my voice nearly went. He never mentioned it again. But he started watching Derek at dinner, quietly, the way I did, and I logged in my notebook that I had just placed a weight on a 12-year-old that I would spend the rest of my life trying to lift. It was the following Thursday that Priya found me in the garden. Out of the sight line of the road, which I later understood was deliberate. She stood with her hands folded, choosing her words like a woman stepping stone to stone across a creek. Mrs. Marsh. May I ask you something, without it going anywhere? She waited for my nod. When Mr. Lund hired me, he gave me your medication schedule. Typed. Very organized. Doses, times, everything. She took the folded page from her cardigan pocket, and next to it, her dented little notebook. It is my habit to check schedules against bottles. Every house, every client. And I have now checked every prescription bottle in your house, twice. Her dark eyes came up and held mine, steady as a level. The schedule he gave me doesn't match any of them. Not the doses. Not the timing. Not one. For a moment, the garden was very quiet. A jay complained somewhere over the water. And I stood among the last of Walter's late tomatoes, holding a truth I hadn't asked for and couldn't put down, because here is the thing about that typed schedule. If Derek had simply been careless, a busy man who scribbled doses from memory, the errors would be random. Careless is random. But my mind was already doing what it has done my whole life, uninvited, sorting the discrepancies Priya listed into a pattern. Every mismatch on that page ran in the same direction. Lower where it should be higher. Evening where it should be morning. Not noise. Signal. Priya, I said carefully, would you make me a copy of that schedule? And keep the original somewhere that isn't this house. She looked at me for a long moment, at the crossword woman, the onion dicing woman, the woman who did not match her hiring briefing, and something settled behind her eyes. I already made a copy, she said. The original is in my car. Then, so quietly it was almost lost under the wind, in my work, Mrs. Marsh, when the family story and the patient don't match, I believe the patient, I could have hugged her. Instead I made chai, because we are who we are. That Friday, in the last booth at the Blue Heron, I laid the schedule in front of Ray next to a request I'd been circling for a week and hadn't had the nerve to say out loud. He read it in my face before I spoke. You want your pharmacy records. I want 14 months of refill history, I said. Every fill date, every dose, every pickup. And I want my hospital chart from the spring. Admission labs, medication reconciliation, all of it, they're your records. You're entitled to every page. He tapped the typed schedule. What are you afraid we'll find? I'm afraid of why my blood pressure went sideways after 10 stable years, I said, 6 weeks after my son-in-law moved my prescriptions to a new pharmacy for the savings and started delivering my refills to my door with a smile, because he had. I'd barely registered it at the time, late winter. One more kindness in a 2-year river of them. Evelyn, the copays are robbery, let me switch you somewhere sensible. I'll grab them, I drive past anyway. I had let a man insert himself between me and my own medicine, and I had thanked him for it. Getting my own records required nothing clever, a signature, a form, identification proving I was me. The pharmacy printout came on a Tuesday. My hospital chart, all 200 pages of it, arrived the following week. And on a cold gray afternoon in early November, Ray and I spread it all across my dining room table. Refill history, Priya's notebook, the typed schedule, the admission labs, and built the timeline hour by hour, the way we used to reconstruct a skimming operation from register tapes. I have spent my life turning numbers into pictures. This picture assembled itself like a fever chart, and I will describe it to you the way I later described it to a courtroom. For 10 years, my refill dates marched down the page like fence posts. Every 30 days, same drug, same dose, my own signature on the pickup line. Then, 6 weeks before my collapse, the fence posts move. The pharmacy changes. The pickup signature changes, Derek's initials now, authorized family member. And the pattern goes strange in a very specific way. My primary blood pressure medication gets refilled right on schedule, every 30 days, paid for, picked up, documented. A model patient. Except the hospital's admission blood work. Drawn the morning I collapsed, told a different story. The level of that medication in my blood was, in the attending's typed phrase, markedly subtherapeutic. Barely there. Trace amounts, in a woman whose refill record said she'd swallowed a full dose every morning for a decade, the pills were being purchased. The pills were being picked up. The pills were not arriving in me. I sat with that for a long moment, keeping my breathing even, because I needed to be an examiner for 5 more minutes before I was allowed to be a human being. There were innocent readings, and I made myself list them out loud. Absorption problems. A bad generic batch. An old woman forgetting doses, except Priya's predecessor was me. And I do not forget, and the cheerful blue organizer with its little plastic doors had been filled, every week, by Derek's own hands, ever since he set it on my counter where the kettle used to be. He sorted it all, he'd said. He certainly had. Say it, Ray said quietly. I can't prove what was in those little doors, I said. The pills are gone. Swallowed. Nobody tested them. What I can prove is custody and outcome. He controlled the pharmacy. He controlled the pickups. He controlled the organizer. And at the end of his 6 weeks of control, a woman with a decade of stable readings had almost none of her medication in her blood and a blood pressure crisis that nearly killed her, a crisis he then cited. In a sworn court filing, as evidence she can't manage her own affairs. I looked up at Ray. It's circumstantial. And it's damning. Both things are true. Here is the sentence I wrote in the hidden notebook that night, and I stand by it. A thief takes what you have, but a predator takes what you are. $31,000 in layered fees, that was theft, and theft is a Tuesday. This was different. The collapse wasn't the excuse for the scheme. The collapse was the scheme. He had needed a diminished Evelyn, and when the real Evelyn stubbornly refused to diminish, he had manufactured one, with a kettle on the floor of Walter's kitchen and a gray curtain coming down. My hospitalization. The fog, the notary on day 6, the too heavy pen. He hadn't exploited my worst 9 days. He had authored them. Ray was on his feet before I finished, and what happened next was the closest he and I have come to a real fight in 50 years of friendship. We call the county tomorrow, he said. Adult Protective Services, the sheriff, all of it. This stopped being a fraud file, Evie. This is a man who put your body in play. He did it once and it worked. People who do it once and it works, he didn't finish. He didn't have to, and tomorrow afternoon, I said, a detective calls Derek, because that's what happens with a report like this, it gets investigated, which means it gets disclosed. And Derek, who has a law license's worth of charm in every document, sits across from that detective and explains that his mother-in-law's own physicians found nothing suspicious in the spring, that elderly patients skip doses all the time, that the poor woman is now accusing family of poisoning her, which is, Ray, word for word, the paranoia his petition predicts. We'd be handing him the only witness that could sink me, myself, sounding exactly like the woman he invented. My voice was shaking now, and I let it. The hearing is in 9 weeks. 9 weeks, and everything goes on the record under oath, in front of a judge, with rules of evidence, where his charm is worth nothing and my file is worth everything. If we spend the accusation now, we spend it in his territory. If we spend it there, we spend it in mine, and if he gets impatient in those 9 weeks? Ray said, low. You're alone in this house eating out of an organizer he fills. Chloe is asleep next to him. Theo is down the hall. You want to run the clock, fine, tell me how you run it without leaving all 3 of you inside the machine. That was the argument, and I want you to know we did not resolve it that night, because true things don't resolve on schedule. We resolved pieces. The blue organizer stayed on the counter as set dressing, and every pill I actually swallowed came from a second set of bottles that Priya filled from the pharmacy directly and kept in her own bag, an arrangement she agreed to with one slow nod and no questions. God bless her level eyes. My checkups moved to a physician in Traverse City that Dana arranged, where I was boringly, documentably myself. Rule 1, never performed for doctors, now doing double duty as a shield. And Ray extracted one promise, his condition for staying: if anything moved, anything, the report went in that day, case be damned. I gave him my word. He held my eyes until he believed it. The second discovery came the same week, and it was quieter, and it broke me worse. I've been assembling exemplars of Chloe's handwriting, a task with its own private cruelty, because it meant an afternoon among birthday cards and old checks and the guest book from Walter's funeral. My daughter's real signature scattered across 20 years of loving me. Dana had retained a forensic document examiner downstate, a precise, colorless man named Whitcomb who talked about handwriting the way I talk about ledgers. We sent him the exemplars, the affidavit from the guardianship petition, and certified copies of 3 trust amendments Derek had recorded over the past year, documents that also, I had noticed with the cold prickle, carried Chloe's name as a witness. His preliminary report ran 11 pages. I only needed one line of it, but I'll give you the picture the way he gave it to me. In every genuine signature going back 2 decades, my daughter's C opens like a door, a little flourish at the top. Curling forward, an optimist's letter, her 3rd-grade teacher's fault. On the affidavit, and on all 3 trust amendments, the C curls backward. Closed. Careful. Drawn, Whitcomb said, not written, the pen moving at the speed of copying, not the speed of a name you've signed your whole life. For documents, one hand, and the hand was not Chloe's. His formal opinion used the words highly probable, which in his field is a shout. My daughter had never sworn her mother was crumbling. My daughter had never witnessed the amendments that dismantled my estate. Derek had simply signed her, reached over and used her name the way he'd used my medicated hand, one more asset in the household. One more instrument to execute. And she was living in his house, cooking his chicken, going pale at his dinner table, married to her own forger and not knowing it. I had been building this case out of cold anger, and cold anger is sustainable, you can run on it for years. What arrived when I read Whitcomb's report was not cold. Every maternal alarm I owned went off at once, and it took everything I had learned in 68 years not to drive to my daughter's house that night and pull her and Theo out of it with my bare hands. The moral arithmetic of waiting had changed. Before, I was protecting my money and my name. Now every day I stayed silent. Chloe slept beside a man who had engineered a hospitalization and forged her hand onto felonies, and my grandson's bedroom was 20 feet from his office. I wrote the count of days until the hearing on the inside cover of the hidden notebook and crossed one off each night, like a prisoner, like a prayer. I understand him better now than I did then. That's not forgiveness, it's just the file. When everything finally came open, the records showed what had been under Derek's smile the whole time, a margin account leveraged into the sky and called in, quarter after quarter, a side venture, bridge loans for lakefront flippers, the original Lund Bridge, his actual dream once, dead and rotting on the books, client money he'd have to answer for by spring. I've imagined him 100 times, alone at his desk at 1 a.m. with those statements glowing in front of him. Doing what drowning men in my files always do, converting terror into narrative. He wasn't robbing a widow. He was consolidating family assets. Protecting everyone's future. Making the hard calls nobody else could make. The most dangerous man in any ledger is not the one who knows he's a thief. It's the one who has promoted himself to steward, and stewards, when the water reaches their chin, get impatient. 9 days after Whitcomb's report, on a Thursday morning with frost still on the porch rail, I heard tires in my gravel and looked up from the sink to see Derek's SUV in the drive, unannounced, no call, no text. I learned afterward what had spooked him, a routine notification from the records custodian that copies of certain filings had been requested. The kind of automated courtesy that means nothing and, to a guilty man, means everything. He came up the walk fast and then visibly slowed himself, resetting his shoulders, reassembling the warmth, and by the time I opened the kitchen door he was wearing the full Sunday dinner smile, breath fogging, a leather folio tucked under his arm like a hymnal, Evelyn. Bright as the frost. I was driving right past, I keep doing this to you, showing up like a stray. He was already inside, already filling my kitchen, setting the folio on my table and unzipping it with those clean, confident hands. Listen, don't let me interrupt your morning. This'll take 2 minutes. The attorneys found a gap in the trust paperwork, total housekeeping. Boring stuff, you'd fall asleep if I explained it. He clicked a pen and set it down on top of the page, angled toward me, and looked up with all the gentle patience in the world. We just need one more little signature. Here is what a courtroom never sees: the moment a case almost dies in a kitchen, at 9 in the morning, over a pen, because I could have ended everything right there. The folio was open. The man who had authored my collapse was standing on Walter's floorboards, smiling at me, and every certified page of what he'd done was hidden 40 feet away. Part of me, the part that had been crossing off days like a prisoner, wanted to drop the performance, look him dead in the eye, and watch the smile fall off his face like wet plaster. Instead, I became the woman he'd invented. Fully. For the first time, at performance pitch, with everything on the line. Oh, Derek. I let my hands flutter toward the folio and then away, a bird that couldn't decide on a branch. More papers. There's always more papers. I picked up the pen, and I felt him relax, actually watched his shoulders drop a quarter inch, and then I set it down again and drifted, mid-thought, to the window. Did Chloe send the chicken recipe? I keep meaning to ask her. Walter never liked chicken. Did you know that? 41 years and I could count on one hand, Evelyn. Gently. He slid the folio an inch closer. The signature first, then chicken. It's just housekeeping, I repeated, warmly, vaguely. And then I deployed the sentence I'd been saving for exactly this door, rehearsed in the bathroom mirror until it sounded like fog instead of strategy. You know, sweetheart, my doctor, the new one, the lady doctor, she told me I'm not to sign anything unless Chloe reads it to me first. She was very stern about it. Doctor's orders. I smiled at him, guileless as milk. You understand. You're the one who says I get muddled. I want you to appreciate the architecture of that lie, because I'm proud of it and I'm allowed to be. It refused him nothing. It accused him of nothing. It used his own petition as the lock. The muddled woman was simply following instructions, the way muddled women should. And it put Chloe in the doorway of every document he would ever bring me again. He couldn't argue with it without arguing against his own sworn filing. Something moved through Derek's face, a flicker of arithmetic, cost and delay and recalculation, and then the warmth resurfaced. Of course, he said, zipping the folio. Of course. We'll do it all together. Family meeting. He kissed the top of my head, and it took everything Walter ever taught me about patience not to flinch. You're doing great, Evelyn. He was in his SUV within 90 seconds. Through the curtain. I watched him sit in the driveway for a moment, thumbs hammering at his phone, and I understood two things with total clarity. 1, he'd bought the performance completely. 2, whatever he'd come to get, he needed it badly enough to come unannounced at 9 in the morning, and men who need things badly don't stop asking. Dana called it correctly within the hour. He'll tighten his grip now, she said. Frightened controllers always escalate control. Document every instance. Dates, times, witnesses. Control is our exhibit, Mrs. Marsh, his petition claims concern. Let him keep proving it's a leash. She was right by the weekend. It started with the car. Derek arrived Saturday with Chloe in tow, Chloe pale. Silent, staring at her own hands, and explained, so reasonably, that everyone would feel better if the Buick stayed parked for a while. Just until the doctors sort things out. Priya can drive you anywhere. He held out his palm for the keys with the sad, firm face of a man confiscating a teenager's phone, and I handed them over with doddering grace while screaming inside a soundproof room. Logged, date, time, witness, Chloe, who looked at the floor, then it was the visits. He installed a doorbell camera, for security, aimed, I noted, to catch the driveway and the walk, every arrival, every plate. He began calling each evening at 7, cheerful little welfare checks that mapped my days. He mentioned, twice, casually, that he'd heard I'd been out and about, which meant he was reading the camera. Ray stopped coming to the house entirely. Our Fridays at the Blue Heron became Tuesdays at a library 2 towns over, then a church parking lot, then phone calls from Priya's cell while she ran my errands. I was 68 years old and running a counter-surveillance rotation against my own family, and the notebook under Walter's workbench got thicker by the day. Then Derek did something smarter, and for 11 days it genuinely hurt us. Dana had subpoenaed the internal records from Lakeshore first, the audit trail behind the account changes, the email address, the online access logs that would show exactly who had rerouted my statements and from what device. Routine production, 10 business days. On day 10, nothing. On day 12, a letter. The bank was reviewing the scope of the request. Dana made calls. And the calls kept landing on the desk of one particular assistant branch manager, a man named Kittredge, who, Ray discovered with 2 afternoons of asking around, golfed in Derek's foursome, sat with Derek on the Harbor Festival Committee, and had received from Derek, over the years, a steady river of client referrals. Kittredge wasn't destroying anything, he was too careful for that. He was simply slow. Slowness with a friendly face. The most deniable sabotage there is, and the hearing date did not care about his excuses. I knew the move intimately. I'd watched 100 Kittredges stall 100 subpoenas, and I'd never once expected to be the widow on the far end of the delay. Ray solved it the way Ray solves things, by going around the mountain instead of through it. Banks have friends, he said. Counties don't. The deed, the POA, the LLC filings, the recorded trust amendments, everything that had ever touched a government stamp existed in duplicate in public custody, beyond Kittredge's reach. Ray spent 3 days at the recorder's office and the probate clerk's counter, and came back with certified, sealed, date-stamped copies of every recorded instrument, each one self-authenticating under the evidence rules, none of them requiring 1 minute of the bank's cooperation. The account-level records would come eventually. Dana filed a motion to compel that would land, with beautiful timing, the week before the hearing, but we no longer needed the bank to build the spine of the case. Let Kittredge stall, Ray said, sliding the folder across a library table. He's guarding a door we already stopped using, which left the hardest operation of the winter. The one with my daughter's face on it. I had promised myself I would wait until after the hearing to tell Chloe, cleaner for the case. Safer for the secret. Theo broke that promise for me. It was a Saturday in December, chess and peanut butter, and he was arranging his pawns when he said, in the too casual voice children use for things that are bothering them, Dad's been asking me stuff. Like, he asks if you repeated anything, or seemed weird, and then he writes it in his phone. He told me the doctors need examples of your bad days. Theo moved a pawn. I didn't have any examples. So Dad said he'd help me remember, he'd help him remember. I kept my face pleasant and my voice level while something behind my sternum turned to ice water. Derek was coaching my grandson. Building testimony inside a 12-year-old. One leading question at a time, and it meant the file wasn't enough anymore. I could win the hearing in 9 weeks and still lose Theo to 9 weeks of curated memories. Chloe had to know. Now. The mother in the house was the only firewall left, and she was standing in the fire without knowing it was lit. The problem was geometry. The doorbell camera watched my house. Derek's 7 o'clock calls mapped my evenings. Priya drove me, but Priya's hours were Derek's information. There was exactly one place in Harbor Glen where my daughter and I could stand together unobserved with a legitimate reason, the parking lot of the Harbor Glen market on a Thursday night, when Chloe did the week's shopping alone. A routine so old and boring that no man alive would think to watch it. Priya drove me. She parked 3 rows back and stayed with the car. And under the sodium lights, between a cart corral and my daughter's tailgate, I did the hardest thing this entire war ever asked of me. Harder than the collapse. Harder than the hearing. I handed my child a folder in a grocery store parking lot and dismantled her life in 11 minutes. I'll spare you some of it. I owe her that. But you need the shape. First came confusion. Mom, what is this? Why are we? Then, as she read the affidavit, the guardianship petition with her own sworn statement about her own mother's decline, came the denial. Fast and hot, Mom, I never signed this. I've never seen this. And I said, I know, sweetheart. Keep reading. And I watched my daughter arrive at Whitcomb's report, at the enlarged photographs of 4 signatures, hers that open like doors, and the 4 drawn ones that curl backward, and I watched the exact second the floor went out from under her marriage. She put one hand flat on the tailgate. Her breath came out of her in a shape I hadn't heard since she was 9 and her dog died. He signed my name, she said. Not a question. A coroner's finding. He signed my name on a court document about you. And then, so much worse, in a whisper, the medication stuff. In the folder. Mom. Is that saying what I think it's saying? It's saying what I can prove, I said carefully, which is custody and outcome. He controlled my pills for 6 weeks, and at the end of it I was on a hospital floor. You can decide for yourself what lies between those 2 facts. I did. I have testified in federal court 11 times, and I have never seen anything change the way my daughter's face changed in that parking lot. The denial burned off. The collapse came and went, 90 seconds, her forehead against my shoulder, both of us gripping a folder like a raft. And then something came up out of Chloe that I had not seen since her childhood, or maybe ever, and I recognized it the way you recognize your own handwriting, Steele. She straightened. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, once, efficiently. And she said, tell me what you need, not, let's call the police. Not, let me talk to him. My daughter, 38, exhausted, married to a forger, standing in the wreckage of a decade, skipped every stage a lesser person would need and went straight to the mission. I could have wept. There wasn't time, 11 days, I said. The hearing is in 11 days. Here is the terrible thing I'm asking. Go home. Kiss him. Cook the chicken. Be the wife he thinks you are for 11 more days, because if he suspects for 1 hour that you know, he amends, he shreds, he moves money, and he gets ahead of the story, and Theo is in that house. Can you do 11 days? She was quiet for a moment, looking at something in the middle distance that I hope I never have to see. He has a filing drawer in his office, she said. He locks it. But he keeps the key in his gym bag, because he thinks I don't touch his gym bag because it smells. A short, terrifying laugh. 11 days. Yes.